talked a little bit about in the introduction about crowdfunding and technology, and these are things that I actually don't think too much about and don't really care that much about. And what I'm going to share a little bit of today are the stories that have come out of the platform itself, and at some level, historical references to why the platform exists in the first place. And I think the thing to start with is it's really more about this attitude of changing culture or creating a new culture, or perhaps in another frame of reference, using technology, not for the sake of technology, but simply to bring us back to a culture that we missed. Okay. So we started a company about 5 years ago. Actually, what we always seem to get lost in is everything that happened since the success. Kickstarter was a project of the guy in the middle, Perry Chen, who had an incident or a wall that he was up against in 2001. And the dream wasn't really realized until 2009 when we launched. So there was a massive period of time of reflection for Perry, and then meeting me and meeting our other co-founder, Yancey, and then collaborating on this early idea that he had. I'm not going to go into the story of that wall that Perry was up against. You can read that on the website. We actually share it. We talk a bit about the genesis story, the history of the company, why it existed. Right now, what I want to get into is a little bit of the sort of historical context. I think Seth talked a little bit about this fascination with an addiction to growth. This is my very uneducated, unscientific chart. I won't go into great detail about it because there's really no numbers, but it is there just to illustrate and express this addiction, this desire to constantly grow and push and push and push. And it's always around this one specific thing, this metric around numbers. And it's sad to me. Ultimately, what it's led to is this other habit that we've gotten into, this sort of industrialization of everything around us, from the food that we eat, factory farms, to the clothes that we wear, made in factories in China, or even in the countries that we live in. We have processed everything into some small, minute economic gain. And through that whole process, through that fascination of growth, through that fascination of, or result of industrializing everything that we've essentially created over history, we've lost something. We've lost the stories, the connection to the things that we wear. I'll give a quick little example, a few of the items that I'm wearing, and I didn't pick this out. This just happens to be what I threw in my bag when I came out to Paris. This sweater, made in San Francisco, I know the guys who make it. It's a cycling sweater, so there's some cycling weird technology stuff in it. And same for these pants. They're made in Brooklyn. I know the two guys who started the company, I think something like 5 years ago, and my connection to them is because they have a story, because they are human, and they make it in their little tiny apartment in Brooklyn, right? On top of all this, we've heard earlier just about this sort of world of incumbents, right? What eventually becomes the gatekeepers of society, or the gatekeepers for ideas, right? It's this fear of change, it's this fear of the unknown, it's this complacency. And I think the thing that I observed over sort of my lifetime, small period of time, is simple, that at some point we've lost the plot. We misunderstood what we've created or what we're working for or where we work, why it even exists. And the undercurrent that's happened, Seth again talked a bit about this, is culture changed, people changed. And change is usually a reflection of one generation's desire not to be like the previous. Right? You can call it a revolution, you can call it a revolt. I think it's something far more silent than that and subtle. What does a gatekeeper do? Does anybody know? Their one job is essentially to lock the gate, to say no, right? And what does this end up doing? This ends up, well, creating situations like this. And eventually these walls get toppled down. Actually, I think right down the street we saw an example of that a number of years ago. So growth is not infinite, right? This is a photograph from Detroit, the epicenter of automotive in the United States. This was one of the largest factories and one of the largest buildings in the world at one point. And now, actually, to kind of play off of a comment that Seth made, it's actually a home to some of the most interesting art in the world. So artists have taken what was an industrial complex and use it as their tapestry and reinvent. So we've got this addiction to growth, and we lose culture, and we lose humanity, and we lose the plot. So I want to go back a bit to what the future might look like. And I think a little bit of this reflection is certainly through the lens of Kickstarter, but you could call it Etsy, you could call it Julie, from earlier. Perfect example of people seeing something in the world either that they missed or something that they want to change and doing something about it. So the stories I'm going to tell now, there's 3 stories. There are 3 projects that came out of Kickstarter with that same desire, the same desire that Julie had to create something new, to create something that perhaps represented something from her past, but was very personal to her. And I think what the point of this is essentially representing this change, this undercurrent that's happening in society. So there's a sort of linear motion to these projects. This is one of the early projects that came up on Kickstarter. And for those who don't know the sort of early beginnings of the platform, when we launched in 2009, we didn't have any bombastic advertising campaigns or marketing. We don't even have a marketing department. We just told our friends, right? We reached out, shared a bit of what we've been working on all these years, and said, hey, that thing that we've been talking about forever and ever and ever and ever is finally up, and you can play with it. So the early projects were all people that we knew, all people that we had close relationships, or perhaps people that we met along the way while telling the story of what this thing was, this crazy idea was that we were going to build. This girl, Allison Weiss, came along probably about 6 weeks after we had launched. And there's a couple things that were interesting. The first being that we didn't know who she was. How did she find out about Kickstarter? How did she find out about us? And it was a very simple answer. It was word of mouth. Somewhere on some blog or Twitter or some friend had told her about this thing that we had built, this thing that we had toiled over. So what did she want to do? She wanted to raise funds for an album. She was a musician on the side. At the time, she was living in Athens, Georgia, and was going to school, there's a university there, and was going to school to be a designer, right? In her free time, she had an audience, and the audience was a new audience. It wasn't an audience that was in the bar where she played her music. She was a singer-songwriter. Her audience was online. She had a Tumblr that we found out about later, and she had built this audience up over, let's call it a year or 2. And she'd given her music away for free. She just posted to YouTube, shared the link on Tumblr, and let people listen to the music, download the music, perhaps buy it if they wanted to on iTunes. When she launched her campaign, she wanted to raise $2,000. And at the time, 2009, a few weeks after we had launched, that was a far-fetched idea, $2,000. The most that we had seen around then was probably about $500 to $1,500. And so the second interesting thing happened with Kickstarter and Allison, or through Allison, and that was she had a goal of $2,000 that she crushed in 24 hours. And so we start wondering, well, who is this person? This was our first viral campaign, if you will. And so within 24 hours, she raised her goal, and we'd never seen that. We'd seen prior projects raising $1,500 over 30 days or the like. It was these extended periods of time. There was people, though, experimenting with the platform and trying to figure it out. The third point about Allison's project was this playfulness, this collaboration, this dynamic between herself as an artist and the audience that was buying into her music, right? When she hit $2,000, she's like, well, what's next? What do I do, right? I still have another 30 days to go or 29 days to go. How do I raise more? And so she started playing with the audience and saying, hey, if I reach $3,000, I'll get on Skype with that person and we'll have a chat. And so suddenly, as an artist, she's connected herself very directly to that audience. And she did a very cute thing at this point. It just so happened that the person who put her over the edge at 3,000 was in Australia. She didn't realize that she had an audience in Australia, but she got on Skype with this person anyway and asked her about the flushing toilets going backwards and stuff like that. Anybody? Yeah. And it was very cute. It was a very cute conversation. But the funny thing is she actually recorded the whole video, and then shared it on the project. And so she started sharing the dialogue and sharing the relationship and even sharing this sort of awkwardness of the questions and the back and forth. She was having fun. She was mucking about. She was tinkering. She was just playing. She was just being herself. So she went on to raise $7,000. Her original goal was $2 million. And like I said, this was our first sort of big viral kind of success. And she taught us a lot about the product. I want to reflect on one little point in there, is that she taught us a lot about the product. We listened and we engaged with her. She actually came to our office. I don't have a photograph of it here, but she came to our office and sang a song at lunch at one point. This is a bit to express, again, one of Seth's points about our connection to the people that run projects on the platform. We back them, we support them, but we also invite them into our home. We understand and empathize with what they're going through because of the history that I talked about before, right? The no's that they got. Allison couldn't get on a record label until this project. Another interesting thing that happened, I think, that relates the real world, the old real world, to this new world of digital. About a month later, after her campaign had ended, she went on tour. That's what artists and musicians do. She happened to go through Portland, and one of our developers was living in Portland at the time. And so he happened to go. We were on instant message, and he said, I'm going to go see Allison. It'll be really cool. I happened to be up, because as an entrepreneur starting a new company, you're up all the time. So at 3 in the morning, he comes back and instant messaged me, and he says, I went, it was awesome, but it was also really depressing. There was 10 people there. 10 people, and yet she was able to raise enough to put her album together. And it dawned on me that this was, depressing, that she couldn't pull together an audience locally, but then it dawned on me, something else dawned on me, and that was that her audience wasn't limited to geography, right? Her audience was that woman in Australia that put her over the edge at $3,000. Her audience was the fans that funded her on Kickstarter. Her fans were the ones, or her audience were the ones that were following her on Tumblr. They were all over the world, and they weren't limited to geography. So I want to tell another story, if I can. Story a little bit further in time. We've grown up a little bit as a company, and we started seeing different sorts of projects. This, I thought, was an interesting one, sort of edging into product design, but something much more interesting below the surface. So there's an organization in the United States called Project H. It's a non-for-profit, and they do education-oriented design projects. They teach kids how to design and then build the things that they design. And what they had done in this case is they worked with a school in Oakland, California, and some of the students had come up with this idea to create a modular shelving unit. I think the important piece here is less about the numbers that they raised, how many people backed the project is listed here, but more so about this opportunity that kids had to express themselves, and what do they learn through this process? What do they learn by people patting them on the back and supporting them with $78,000? These were high school students who designed something, who raised $78,000 at $200 a pop. For one of those squares was $200, right? Blogs wrote about them. They were the fanfare of the moment. They had their 15 seconds of fame. And they're high school students. Who knows what they can do next? You might want to worry about that, perhaps. But I wonder what sort of ambition that they can provide if they've been given the opportunity, given the keys to the gate to open and unlock the gate, and their excitement coming out of this project, knowing that the world is essentially theirs to do something with, to express. Last project is the behemoth of the platform, and sort of the closer, if you will. And I share it because I think it's important to recognize the diversity of projects, but also the diversity of scale. What I want to talk about is the diversity in scale as well, right? Not everything has to be a massive project. The majority of projects sit somewhere between Xspace and Allison Weiss, around the $25,000 to $50,000 mark. What we hear a lot about, perhaps, in the news are these massive projects. But it's worth, I think, digging a little bit deeper behind this one in particular, because it's actually a very interesting story, no different than any other. No different than anybody in this room who's had an idea, couldn't get funding for it, or just got a lot of no's and quizzical looks. So this is Eric. He started a company called Pebble. And similar to us at Kickstarter, similar to many projects on the site, he had this idea that nobody quite understood. He wanted to create a watch that was connected to your iPhone, connected to your mobile device, and there was a whole story behind it. And he was fed up with the no, and he saw this opportunity with Kickstarter and shared his idea on the site and proved a point. And the point that he proved was that there was a market for this weird idea that nobody quite understood, that nobody understood the opportunity here, and they took a chance, and nobody was willing to really take a chance on him. His initial goal, by the way, was $100,000, which, again, in Kickstarter terms, is actually quite large. He kind of blew the doors off of that. So, similar to Allison, his $100,000 goal was blown away in 24 hours. And then he starts wondering, well, now what? I think $300,000 was raised by the weekend, and then they went all the way up to 10 million. To this day, it's still the largest campaign out there. Anybody in the audience have a Pebble watch? I think I saw somebody earlier. Anybody afraid to raise it? You got one? I know there's more. I know it. This is one of those things that you end up seeing everywhere. And so I wonder, for the watchmaker in the room, for the watchmaker down the street, thinking about what a watch represents, thinking about the history of the watch, could never come up with what Eric had come up with. And it's usually those incumbents that can't imagine that future. But these people are all around us. It's the Julies of the world. It's the Kickstarter campaigns of the world. And so one final, my only stat really for the day, I don't really care too much about numbers per se, but these are fun to play with. So there's been, in the 5 years that we've been in existence, there have been 63,000 projects, successful projects on the site. That is, I guarantee you, a drop in the bucket to all the people with ideas out there that have unfulfilled those dreams. There's a bigger world out there. And we've seen over $1 billion pledged to those 63,000 projects. It's quite an impact over 5 years. And the reality is this is just the beginning. We're sort of still walking around perhaps in diapers and trying to figure out how to get down the street and what have you. We're still sorting out what the world represents and what the opportunity is with change that we can impart. So I think the last little bit, it's always good to put a slide up with a quote from somebody who's more intelligent than you. Speaks a bit to the experience that I've had with Kickstarter, and that is those crazy ones in the room, those crazy ones with the idea that maybe you're a little too embarrassed to share, and yet it's that crazy idea that might actually connect you to somebody else in the room or somebody else across the world, and you just don't know, but you don't know unless you try. And I think the biggest point to across all those 3 projects and all 63,000 of those projects across the site is they tried. They put themselves out there. They were willing to take the risk of attempting something great. Those are the ones that made it. And for those that may not have made their goal, they learned something from that process and possibly humility, possibly something interesting to parlay into their next endeavor. But they did it. And that's something that's really important. Fini.